I'm David Knowles, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today, we analyse the latest news from the front lines as Ukraine's counteroffensive intensifies. We discuss the Russian fortifications that Kyiv's troops are aiming to break through, and we report on suspected partisan warfare as more railway lines in occupied Ukraine are blown up.
Bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
This hideous and barbaric venture of Vladimir Putin must end in failure.
We need a military strategy for Ukraine to gain a decisive advantage on the battlefield, to win the war.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
Every weekday afternoon, we sit down with leading journalists from the Telegraph's London newsroom and our teams reporting on the ground to bring you the latest news and analysis on the war in Ukraine. It's Monday, the 12th of June, 1 year and 108 days since the full-scale invasion began. And today I'm joined by our Associate Editor Dominic Nichols, Senior Foreign Correspondent Roland Oliphant, and Brussels Correspondent Joe Barnes. I started by asking Dom for the latest news from Ukraine.
Well, hi David. Hi everybody. So quite a lot to get through today. We'll take it slow, but I'll start with today's British Defence Intelligence update. The reason being that it's a neat summation, which we'll then dig into. But today's MOD update says, in some areas, Ukrainian forces have likely made good progress and penetrated the first line of Russian defences. In others, Ukrainian progress has been slower. Russian performance has been mixed. Some units are likely conducting credible manoeuvre defence operations, while others have pulled back in some disorder amid increased reports of Russian casualties as they withdraw through their own minefields. Okay, so that's not a bad summation of what's happening, but let's dig into some of the detail. But do hold that in the back of your mind, and please remember that this is based on very mixed messaging. Virtually nothing coming out from Ukraine. We're relying a lot on trying to verify other reports that we're seeing, a lot from sort of Russian Telegram channels, which have to come, as I said before, with a health warning. So bear with us. We're doing the best we can in the fog of war. Oh, and but I should say we don't give anything away here. Well, we don't get anything ready on the QT from spies and all the rest of it. So we are not giving anything away here when we talk about locations and unit designations that isn't freely available on social media. We might put it together, and there's a certain amount of assessment in that, but we check ourselves and we do not give anything away that would be helpful to Russian forces. Okay, so last week I was saying the counteroffensive from Ukraine seems to be very broadly on three axes. So in the east of the country, heading east, kind of through Bakhmut and that area, through the Donbass, with an axis, like say, due east. Then further down around the corner, if you like, heading southeast. There's another axis there, based around the town of Velika Novosilka. And then another one a bit further to the west, heading south from Zaporizhia Oblast, so heading south down that way. So those are broadly the three axes that we are going to be talking about until there's a dramatic change in the offensive. But in the east, there has been fighting. So if we take Bakhmut as a sort of central pin in our map. Let's take Bakhmut. So about 40 k's northeast of Bakhmut, there's Bilorovka, town of Bilorovka, just west of Severodonetsk. This is in Luhansk region. There is fighting there. I highlight that just to indicate that there is fighting up and down the line, not just in the few areas that we're able to highlight, but there is a lot of fighting there as well. But back to Bakhmut, the Ukrainian Eastern Group of Forces spokesperson, Colonel Sergei Cherevati, said that Ukrainian forces have advanced up to 1,400 meters on the Bakhmut front. Now, this has been backed up by information that we are seeing from the military blogging community. They're saying Ukraine has advanced to the northwest and the northeast of Bakhmut. Interesting, that's the first time we've heard of Ukraine advancing on the northeast of Bakhmut for a while. Now, these are small gains, 1,400 metres, not massive in a huge country. But if you think about it, compared to the gains Russia has made over recent months in Bakhmut, it is impressive, shows the level of fighting there. I mean, imagine if in the last few weeks, when we were talking about Bakhmut and Wagner and all that kind of stuff, if we'd said Russia has advanced 1,400 metres over the weekend, the Moscow PR machine would have exploded in an orgy of self-congratulation, and there'd be a lot of folks saying that Ukrainian forces were finished, blah, blah, blah. So put that in context there. Why are they fighting in Bakhmut? So we're suggesting And Mike Martin put this idea out as well last week. I mean, it is symbolic for Russia. They've been fighting. They've lost whatever it was, 20,000 men since Christmas, fighting for Bakhmut. It is symbolic. It was heralded as a massive victory when they took the city a couple of weeks ago. So any reversal there will have a major political effect in Moscow. And also, we know that Bakhmut is an area where you have Wagner, you have the Chechens fighting, you've got the local militia, the People's Republic. You've also got regular Russian MOD. And there's huge fault lines between all these different units. They're not good at coordination. They don't liaise well with each other. So that is an area of military activity. If you try and get into those fault lines, you can have a great effect. That's a sort of military truism. So it's unsurprising that Ukraine has decided to go hard back around the area of Bakhmut. Let's move further around to the south. That's southeastern access through Velika Novosilka. So we're now about 60 km southwest of Donetsk city. So that seems to be the area Ukraine's had the most success over the weekend. Ukrainian forces have advanced about 10 km from where we think their start line was, 10 km south. The main defensive line, there are reports that they've got through the first defensive line of Russian obstacles, but the main defended line, we think, is about another 5, 6, 7-ish km south of where they seem to be now. Ukrainian forces have taken a number of villages there, and this was confirmed by Hanna Malia, that's Ukraine's Deputy Defence Minister. She thanked the 35th Separate Brigade of Marines for their action there. Like I said, we're not giving away any OPSEC, that's already out there in social media. That seems to be the most successful front at the moment. Further round, so travel further west on our sort of imaginary map, and you come to the axis that's going due south, aiming towards Melitopol, the closest axis to the Black Sea, the Sea of Azov, and sort of severing that land bridge. Now, on Friday, just after we did the pod, there was a lot of footage said to be from the village of Malotokmachka. This is about 3 km south of Orhiv. And this was footage showing damaged and abandoned Ukrainian Leopard 2A6 tanks and US Bradley infantry fighting vehicles. Now, it looked like they'd been hit by mines. So like I said, this happened after we'd been speaking, but it caused a big flurry over the weekend. As we said, this is going to happen. We should not be shocked by it. This is high-intensity warfare after all. We are used in the West. We're used to seeing the effects of counterinsurgencies in the last 20-odd years. And maybe we've become more accustomed to that. We're not used to seeing tanks and big infantry vehicles getting hit and having tracks blown off and so on and so forth. So, we need to get used to it, but we shouldn't be shocked by it. However, what I would say is that already there have been a number of Russian channels recycling these photos or using different parts of the same images to suggest more such incidents have taken place. Now, there undoubtedly will be in the future, but we should wait to see them. I mean, have no doubt, as and when those happen, Russian channels will be flooding social media with similar images, so we should be careful not to allow ourselves to become duped by recycled images. But what I would say about that action, it looks as if the Ukrainian advance, trying to clear through a minefield, got itself in a right old tangle. Either something broke down or had a track blown off, tried to recover that vehicle. But a whole load of vehicles bunched up, and seemingly there were more mine strikes, and it all just got into a right old mess. But the blasts seem to have come from below. They've not come from above. There's no obvious holes in the side or the turrets of the tanks or the infantry fighting vehicles. So I'm suggesting they weren't hit by anti-tank guided missiles or helicopter-borne missiles. There's been a lot of subsequent footage, or more footage over the weekend. Some footage there was actually some footage that was allegedly from the thermal camera on a Russian Ka-52 attack helicopter. That's showing hits and very dramatic overhead strikes, but they seem to be after the main event. And a static vehicle that hasn't got a crew in it using the gun anymore and hasn't got any tracks, I think even I'd be able to hit that given a fair wind. What we've not seen, though, in that incident, there were no turrets tossed like we've seen throughout this war from the Russian side. There was no mass destruction indicating that a catastrophic incident inside the vehicle. So that shows that these vehicles can take hits. I'm just going to pause briefly and talk the difference between an M kill and a K kill. We talk about an M kill, which is mobility kill. So a vehicle that, let's say, goes over a mine, has its tracks blown off, it can't move very far then, needs to be recovered, dragged out and what have you. But the gun will probably still work, the optics will still work, the radios will still work, and the crew are probably still alive. We then talk about a K kill, which is I don't think the K stands for anything other than kill. Is when a vehicle has been utterly destroyed and it's just scrap metal and the crew are probably dead. So we need to differentiate between what is an M kill that can probably be recovered and repaired and eventually go back in the line, or a K kill. And the point to make there is that, as with this footage, we didn't see any dead bodies, so that suggests the crew compartments were not compromised and the soldiers were able to dismount their broken vehicles, cross to other vehicles and get the hell out of there. This highlights the importance of industrial resilience in major warfare, who can keep going for the longest, and the need for the West to keep sending such equipment. So it looks like a load of vehicles got knocked out, M kills, and then the crews got out, recovered, and will hopefully fight another day. And then later on, strikes were called in to put the vehicles on fire and what have you. So just be careful with the images that you do see. Now, Sergei Shoigu, the Russian defense minister, he was shown over the weekend on state television awarding the Hero of Russia Gold Star to soldiers who reportedly had destroyed those tanks. I mean, I'm just amazed by that. The one action, this as I say, this is going to happen again, and yet the first action when a Western tank is knocked out and an American infantry vehicle, and suddenly there's medals all round, lads. I mean, it just speaks of. I think that speaks of a desperation to highlight this for propaganda purposes, but then obviously I'm a biased Western lib. Now, just whilst we're talking about Sergei Shoigu, again, today's British MOD assessment says that over the last week, Shoigu's been trying to build a higher public profile, likely with the aim of presenting himself as being totally in control of the strategic issues, especially in light of the counteroffensive. But they also note that he's made two demonstrably false comments over the last week regarding Russia's defensive operations and Ukrainian losses. British Defence Intelligence say he's almost certainly seriously exaggerated claims about Ukrainian losses, and he's acutely aware of the need to maintain a positive image in the face of increasingly unmasked criticism from some fellow Russians. That's their words. So Shoigu's having a bigger public profile. Over the weekend, he signed an order that suggests that says orders all volunteer detachments, their words, so this is the private military companies like Wagner and so on and so forth, all volunteer detachments must officially sign a contract with Russian MOD and come under its control by the 1st of July. So this is all part of the power play, as we've been talking about for weeks now, months even, power play between Shoigu and the establishment and Prigozhin and Wagner and that side of it. Now, unsurprisingly, Yevgeny Prigozhin's come out the blocks quickly, and he said that Wagner's not going to sign any contracts with the Russian MOD, and he said Wagner PMC has deep expertise and is a highly efficient structure. Unfortunately, most military units do not have such efficiency, and that is precisely because of Shoigu's inability to properly manage the military formations. So straight away, you've got this fault line prized apart again, this move by Shoigu, I think, to try and shore up the power of Russian MOD, and quick as a flash, Wagner would come out and say, not for us, and so on and so forth. So there are tensions there. So that was it for the kind of tactical updates. Lots of other bits and pieces to talk through in a moment, but I better let David have a word.
Well, thank you very much, Dom, for talking us through all those updates. There's a lot of information coming out, and I think, yes, as you said, we're doing our best just to make sure that we only stick to the stuff that we can absolutely verify. So thank you, Dom. As you said, there's other updates, but I'll come back to you, give you a bit of a break. That was a rather mammoth update length from you there. Roland Oliphant, you've been looking at all sorts over the past few days. Can you talk us through some of the stories that you've been writing up?
I don't know what I've been writing over the past few days. It's all been such a blur. I mean, I think Dom's covered the counteroffensive pretty well. I remember sitting here. Let me actually ask Dom, since he's here. We were sitting here literally a week ago, last Monday, when the first pushes started at Velika Novosilka, and you were saying, I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced. Are you happy to say now this is the big push?
Yeah, I think so. I think, there was a lot of toing and froing about, is this the counteroffensive? Is it just recce in force? Is it probing attacks? I mean, all of these things could be true, but President Zelensky said over the weekend that it's on. I think we just, it serves no purpose anymore to say, "Ooh, is this it?" or is it all a big feint? I mean, it might be wrecking in force on a very large scale, looking for where the Russian reserves are going to be deployed. But I don't think we should beat ourselves up anymore about has the offensive started. Clearly, something's happening.
Right, so there you have it. Even the ultra skeptic Tom himself is on board. It is the big push, and that became apparent over the course of the week and the weekend. And as Dom said, I mean, an awful lot of the reporting and writing has been it's been deeply frustrating, actually, because we basically don't have any eyes on the ground. A lot of the stuff that is put out by the Russian war bloggers who have that mixed reputation we're very familiar with of occasionally being accurate and quick and reliable, and definitely having an angle and definitely being selective in what they put out, and definitely being closely curated, despite their apparent independence, pretty closely curated by elements of the Russian state, whether it's Wagner, whether it's the Ministry of Defense itself, or something else. And I think actually, so I'm talking about kind of the reporting of the news rather than the news, because I think Dom's covered it very well. I think we've all got to be very, very wary of that, because the pressure on us is always to fill column inches and say what is new. And the truth is, I think at the moment, we just don't know very much. There was the video that Dom was talking about that came out of the destroyed Leopards and the Bradley, of course, made it was dramatic. It kind of made big waves. At the same time, there was the Ukrainians managed to get out on one of their supposedly independent Telegram channels a video of supposedly showing a bunch of Russian infantry fleeing from a Ukrainian assault. And the kindest thing you can say about both of this is selective stuff, selectively released. Both sides want us to see this. And the truth is we have very, very little idea of what's really happening on the ground at any one moment. That said, at the moment, right now, I'm gently trying to tease out one idea that was presented from Russian sources, from Russian accounts. They said they've noticed that the Ukrainians, at least in this operation, are definitely attacking more at night. A number of Russian bloggers have said this. And one suggestion that they've put out is because it's something to do with superior night sights. Others haven't said that. There is another Russian official who said he thought it was more to do with avoiding aviation and things like that. But there's definitely one of the interesting things to discuss about this operation is how this operation is being shaped, not only by the equipment that NATO has donated to Ukraine, things like the Bradley and the Leopard and so on, but also all this training. And we've made a lot of kind of combined arms training. What should you be doing? Attacking at night is one thing that NATO armies do a lot of, not just because they've got night vision equipment. I'm gently and with a lot of caveats hammering something together about that today. And on my just last thing that's been kind of bugging me, and maybe I should save this as a final thought, but anyway, throughout the weekend actually, I have been thinking a lot about the Battle of Normandy. I know Francis liked to talk about, the anniversary of that last week and the symbolism and so on, but I think what a lot of people don't know about the Battle of Normandy is that after D-Day, there were a series of British and Canadian operations named after racecourses. There was Goodwood and Epsom and I don't know much about racing. Anyway, you don't hear much about them because they were very, very bloody and not very successful and a bit embarrassing. And they took about 7 weeks. But the ultimate kind of result of that, 7 weeks later, 8 weeks later, was that the Americans were able to break out at the other end of the line because the Germans were so depleted. If we'd had Telegram at that time, I mean, my God, the stuff we'd be seeing in video feeds and things like that. And that really is to kind of echo Dom's point about, this is high-intensity warfare, and images like that are to be expected.
Thanks very much, Roland. Can I just pick up, Dom, very quickly, what Roland said about night vision goggles? You have some experience using them, Dom. What are the issues and challenges you found as a soldier?
Issues and challenges I found as a soldier, I better limit that to night vision goggles. It could be here for a much longer time. So basically, I mean, the idea that night vision goggles, both on the person and on the vehicle, suddenly means, it's the same as daylight. I can cut about and do everything I would do, no problem. I mean, that's not correct. They give you a distinct advantage over people who do not have night vision equipment, but it is by no means the panacea, and in many cases can be a double-edged sword. night vision goggles, generally you're looking through almost like small tubes. So you lose all your situational awareness, you lose your peripheral vision, although the modern goggles do sort of spread around the head, if you like, to give you greater awareness. But there's still huge areas that you don't pick up on as you do during daylight. Focus is an issue. It's only the most modern night vision goggles will focus as you move the point of aim, if you like, so it can tell where you're trying to look, and it will adjust the lens so you can either look close up and see who you're speaking to, the buddies to your left and right, or long distance, and so on and so forth. So focus is an issue. You can adjust the focus, but by twiddling the lens as you would with a camera, as you might with a camera, which obviously is not ideal if you're in combat. So night vision goggles in and of themselves for the individual can be really, really tricky and takes a huge amount of training. The same as any of this stuff. We've said many times about the difficulties of doing combined arms operations. So not only mastering your tank or mastering how to be an engineer or an air defender or what have you, but then working alongside all the other parts of the military. Try doing that then at night through goggles. It is another level of complexity. So as I say, it's not just a question of, it's gone a bit dark, bung my goggles on and everything's fine again. There are very broadly two types of things to think about here. There's image intensifiers, which grab as much ambient light from stars and the moon and the sunset and all the rest of it, and intensify that, and then fire that into your eyeballs. So that's good. Okay, on a very, very dark night with no moon, they can be pretty useless, but they're generally okay. The problem there, though, is that as soon as you get any more light, such as a vehicle burning or something going up in smoke, that will also be grabbed. That light will be grabbed and intensified and shot into your eyeballs, and suddenly you can't see a thing. So actually, image intensifiers that are quite old, but they can be sometimes unhelpful. And then you have thermal images that picks up the thermal energy coming off people and vehicles and what have you, and you can see those. But of course, it picks up the thermal imagery. It picks up the thermal energy from everything, from a concrete building that's been in the sun all day. That'll show up quite nicely, and the ground. And you have issues of what's called thermal crossover, when the ambient temperature sort of decreases, and the temperature of the other bits and pieces, they can blur out. So for certain times of the day, even old thermal images can be, again, more trouble than they're worth. So all these things are good, but take a lot of time to work with and understand the foibles and work out how to do. It's going back to working out how to do your job at night. And then, same as we've said before with combined arms warfare, you've got to work alongside everyone else doing their job and working together. So it is not a simple question of, it's gone dark, flick a light on. It really is not as easy as that. And sometimes it's a lot easier just to understand what you're losing by using the Mark 1 eyeball at night time, but you get all the peripheral vision and you kind of understand it a bit more, and you haven't got these big heavy things dangling off the front of your helmet to deal with as well. So yes, they can be very good, but by no means a panacea.
Thanks very much, Dom. Joe, can we come to you? You've been looking at all the different layers of Russian fortifications, well, as much as we can know about them at this point, that lie ahead of the Ukrainian troops in this counteroffensive. Can you talk us through a little bit about what you saw and the dangers they pose?
Yeah, hi folks. So returning from my last trip to Ukraine, I was asked to look at sort of the challenges that Ukraine's military face in attempting to basically claw back land and sort of breach these front lines that separate Kyiv's forces from the Russian enemy. So while I was in Ukraine, sort of this big talk was about this big offensive. The push hadn't quite started as we're seeing it now, but sort of the counteroffensive was the main issue on the table that everyone wanted to get their teeth into. So naturally, sort of, I spent my time talking to soldiers as they prepare and basically get ready for this big moment that we're kind of seeing now. And one of the things I would often ask people, and I do think that we're all too guilty of this. The Ukrainian government are guilty of it. Ukraine's Western allies are sort of guilty of that. They often paint a picture that's probably a bit too rosy. And while Ukraine has been given sort of vast amounts of kit and has built up this sort of force, which it should be capable of mounting a serious counteroffensive, it's by no means going to be easy. And I was speaking to an intelligence officer who's a member of Ukraine's National Guards in the Kharkiv area, and I was basically saying that to this one person, what are the main challenges you face? What are you nervous about? What are going to be the problems? And this chap, Serhiy, basically was incredibly complimentary, and he said, look, Russia have this incredible free-line system of defences, and he said he envied the Russians' abilities to place mines, to dig trenches, and to position a vast array of sort of artillery across that line of defence, or lines of defence, sorry. So I'll read his quote that I wrote in this piece, which is available online and in last weekend's Sunday Telegraph. He said they have unbelievable trenches and unbelievable fortifications. It will be hard to break their lines of defence. There are also minefields, and they have good artillery, more than us, unfortunately. So yeah, this is what I started to look into, and when you start building up a picture using sort of Maxar and Planet Labs satellite imagery that's quite extensive by now, you can really start to build a picture of how this three layer defence system works. And so these three layers of defence basically stretch across the whole 600 miles of front line that separate both Ukraine and Russians' forces, basically all the way from sort of the edge of Crimea all up into the Donbass, and basically any front line that Ukraine is going to have to breach if it wants to sort of claw back that territory as part of this counteroffensive. And so the basis of this sort of three-line defence, the initial step is sort of minefields and these foxholes which are littered with sort of advanced infantry, the first line of Russian defence. And you've seen, and Dom's spoken to that effect, of the ability minefields can have, and even with the latest sort of equipment, Ukraine can get caught out in them if they don't manage to get themselves through, or maybe overcommit or whatever. And then you have these, then you start building up layers. You have these kind of concrete dragon's teeth structures, which are essentially big triangular blocks of thick concrete that are used and dotted around quite steadily to basically create this wall to stop tanks and other armoured vehicles passing. You have this layer of then anti-tank ditches, so if, say, a Leopard or a Challenger could blast its way through one of these dragon's teeth walls, then they would have to then get past these ditches, and the ditches are often vast. They're sort of like 5 or 6 metres wide by 5 or 6 metres deep at times. And then back of that, you then have these really well constructed personnel trenches and concrete bunkers at the rear of the defence, which the main sort of defensive reserves are kept just in case the lines are broken. And then behind them, you have artillery positions, which basically give Russia the ability, fire control, I guess Dom would call it in the military parlance, over every line of defence. They basically have long-range cover over sort of 600 to 700 metres of defences. So if there is a breach, they can then get their artillery guns out, get the drones in the sky and sort of spot these where the breaches happen. Then they can rain down deep fire on those positions. So essentially from front to back, the defences stretch about 20 miles in depth in some cases. And it really does give sort of an emphasis on how hard and tough this is going to be in certain areas for Ukraine. And as I was doing a sort of a sweep over what people were saying this morning about the Ukrainian offensives, and there's the in one area that Ukraine, when it was going through Donetsk and it had got to various villages and liberated them, apparently, some of those villages were still 10 kilometres away from what is going to be the main defensive line. So that only indicates that fighting is going to get tougher. And maybe that does suggest that we are only seeing sort of this kind of recce by force that Dom was talking about, these probing attacks, trying to find early weaknesses in the line. And actually Ukraine hasn't actually poured a lot of its main resources into trying to breach the lines so far. So that's just to give you an element of how hard it's going to be. But yeah, then sort of looking at these defences, you have to go online, because I can try and describe that these huge personnel trenches and anti-tank ditches stretch for many, many, many miles across the front line. But British intelligence officials in one of the MOD's daily updates described the Russian efforts to fortify their positions as some of the most extensive systems of military defensive work seen anywhere in the world. So it's, while the Ukrainians have every right to sort of be optimistic, and they've got a lot of gear, they've been really preparing for this moment, they have incredible motivation to do their job. They're still fighting the war of national survival, and they want to get this over and done with and return to their kind of everyday lives and not have to risk their lives for the sake of their family, friends, country, etc. They still face this sort of in real battle, and I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Joe. Can I come back to Dom very quickly? There's a couple of other updates we didn't speak about at the beginning of the podcast. The war at sea and also the war behind enemy lines. There's been some news coming out over the last few days. Dom, can you talk us through it?
Yeah, I decided to do this bit separately so as not to just overload ourselves, get away from those three axes, but basically a lot of other things going on. So yesterday there were near simultaneous explosions reported on railway lines in Crimea's Kirovsky district. That's the eastern part of Crimea that then heads over the Kerch Bridge into Russia. There was also a blast on a railway line at Yakimivka. This is in the Zaporizhia region, about 10 km southwest of Melitopol, on the way to Crimea. Now these two blasts, I mean, Russia has battalions of railway engineers to fix these things for exactly this purpose, but it will slow down, even if only temporarily, will slow down the logistic movement there by Russia. Whether or not this was regular Ukrainian military or SOF, Special Ops Forces, or partisans, we do not know. There's been a lot of partisan activity around the Melitopol in the last few months, but so we keep an eye on that. And then separately, so H. Sutton, who runs the Covert Shores website, we should all be following him on Twitter. Very good for maritime stuff. He's saying, he did a piece that the Russian government has said that the Black Sea Fleet Vishnya class intelligence ship, the Priazovia, was attacked at the weekend with 6 maritime drones. These maritime drones that we've seen recently skimming along and having various bits and pieces, including the port of Sevastopol itself. But an attack happened about 300 km southeast of Sevastopol in the Black Sea. This was close to where the Russian intelligence ship, research vessel, the Ivan Kurs, was attacked on May the 24th. There are images online on H. Sutton's website. You'll see these drones with something scrawled down the side, which we think translates to cat and raccoon, but we're not entirely sure. Now, H. Sutton is suggesting that the ship was there doing something around the Turkstream natural gas pipeline. It's known that Russian intelligence ships do operate that far down into the Black Sea, well away from Ukrainian-controlled coasts, mostly to monitor NATO air assets. Now, Russia says that this ship was, quote, defending the Turkstream gas pipeline, although this class of intelligence ship is not best suited to protecting undersea infrastructure. But of course, the inference there is that Russia says that it needs to defend the pipeline, possibly from Ukrainian or NATO sabotage. Now, that might seem far-fetched, but it might be setting up for a false flag attack. And of course, in the context of the Nord Stream attack, which, it is of interest. Now, we still no firm idea really what happened to Nord Stream. There's still no very credible answers, not in the public domain anyway, so that's why we were largely quiet about Nord Stream. We're not just chasing each headline there, but clearly undersea infrastructure is still very much a part of this war. What else was there? Justin Trudeau, Canada's Prime Minister, he was in Kyiv over the weekend and promised a load more military support there. On Friday night, Kharkiv, Poltava, that's the region to the west of Kharkiv Oblast, and the Odessa regions were hit with cruise missiles, Iskander ballistic missiles, and the Iranian Shahed 131, 136 drones. Ukraine says it shot down 2 of the cruise missiles and 20 Shaheeds. Unfortunately, fragments of one of the destroyed drones, or at least one, hit an apartment building in Odessa. 3 civilians were killed, 27 others, including a pregnant woman with 2 kids, were injured. So a lot more happening there. We don't want to overload everybody, but we just need to keep marking these things and moving on, because things are moving very quickly.
Thank you very much, Dom. All right, let's go to our final thoughts then. Roland or Joe? Roland, why didn't you start?
My final thought is perhaps not that useful, but it's to be extremely cautious and to treat with great caution anything you read online, especially around this offensive, because, as we know, there is a propaganda war going on, and you will notice it affect you. You will notice yourself, moods rise and fall depending on stuff that's coming out, and so on and so forth. The truth is, let us struggle with explain to editors why we shouldn't be running a massive piece on the latest little scrap of something coming out on Telegram. Right? That's kind of our job. Right? Everybody else, there's not much you can really gain from refreshing Telegram every 5 seconds. To be absolutely honest, I'm afraid the fog of war is as thick as it has been since before the offensive. So that is my perhaps not especially literally the opposite of enlightening final thought, is that there is no light.
Thank you very much, Roland. Joe Barnes.
Yeah, well, echo what Roland has just said there, because we just don't know. We're not on the front line. We can't put eyes and ears on the ground to actually tell the story, so we rely on sort of tertiary information. But then I don't know how much it was covered at the start, as I struggle to connect, but just want to say that Vladimir Putin has sort of lost one of his big allies in Europe in Silvio Berlusconi today, who has reported as have died, aged 86. And Vladimir Putin's sort of message of condolences said, for me, Silvio is a dear person, a true friend, and I've always sincerely admired his wisdom, his ability to make balanced, far-sighted decisions, even in the most difficult situations. Silvio Berlusconi's party helped prop up the coalition government, the right-wing coalition government that currently governs in Rome. And while Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister, is really trying to go on a pro-Ukrainian run after various sort of accusations were levelled against Italy, probably being too soft or almost cozying up to the Kremlin over the years, this will only help her sort of strengthen that position now that she has sort of a very senior guy in Berlusconi out of her way. And yeah, that's what I'll say for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Roland. Dom Nichols, would you like the very final words?
Thanks. I'd just like to draw people's attention to an article that retired US General Ben Hodges has written. We had him on the pod a couple of weeks, in fact, last week, or the week before. Well worth listening back if you're able to. But he's been writing in the Centre for European Policy Analysis, CEPA. You'll find it online. And he said that the real attack in Ukrainians' counteroffensive is still some way off. He points out that a Ukrainian tank battalion normally has 31 tanks. And he says an armoured infantry battalion, so armoured infantry is a mix of tanks and infantry fighting vehicles such as US Bradley, German Marder, that kind of stuff. So an armoured infantry battalion would have about the same number. And in these groupings, tank and armoured infantry battalions, you're going to have armoured vehicles carrying engineers, air defenders, logisticians and so on, as they've got to keep pace with the tanks. Literally keep pace in terms of speed, so you all get to the target, get to the objective at the same time, but also keep pace in terms of survivability. There's no point trying to have an air defender putting this umbrella of protection over the force, which then gets knocked out because the force then moves on and moves outside the scope of that umbrella. So armoured infantry brigades and tank brigades have a lot more armoured vehicles in them for all the other people on the battlefield. Now, an armoured brigade is likely to have 3 tank battalions and 1 or 2 mechanised infantry battalions, this Ben Hodges is saying. So in total, an armoured brigade is going to have about 250 armoured vehicles of different types. I cast your mind back to how many images we've seen over the weekend of knocked out Leopards and Bradleys and what have you, and is this the main attack type thing? He's suggesting not. So Ben Hodges says, when we see 2 or 3 of those brigades, so around 500 to 750 armoured vehicles, focused on a narrow front, it will then be possible to say that the main attack has probably started and where it's happening. Ben says, but even then, be careful. The Ukrainian General Staff will want to keep the Russians guessing about the location of the main attack for as long as possible, and they won't be too bothered and will probably welcome Twitter getting it wrong, unquote. So I suggest to you, I'm sorry, Rowan. Just try and keep awake over there. Don't doom scroll through social media as I did for much of the weekend. Don't try and grab at the what has happened, because that's like trying to grab smoke. It'll go straight, right through your fingers. Instead, we should familiar ourselves with the way that different elements of a military force is employed, so that we are then better able to make sense of the few snapshots that we do see, these snapshots that will include Russian disinformation and will include the over-exuberance of pro-Ukrainian channels. So learn how military force is employed, and then you can make sense of what we are seeing, I'm suggesting. But I do echo Roland's comments. Don't try and grab at every single piece of information you see, because we'll all go mad. So that's my final thought. But David, you're packing your bags.
That is true. Yeah, I'm off on a little trip. Over the next 10 days, I'll be travelling with some volunteers across Europe and into Ukraine. I'll try and call in on the lives here and just give you some updates of what we're seeing and who we're talking to. But that might be a bit tricky. You'll have to sort of go day by day, I think. But yeah, bags are packed, and I've got to leave London in about half an hour. So yes, looking forward to getting back to Ukraine. It was a huge privilege to report from there with you, Dom, last summer, and it should be a very interesting trip. I think I'll have to be very careful. I think about telling you too much about where I am and all that kind of thing, but hopefully be finding some interesting people and seeing some interesting things on the way. So yeah, I'll be back in. I think Dom and Francis, you'll be holding the fort while I'm gone. So I'll be one of your contributors rather than throwing to different people while hosting. So I'm looking forward to that as well.
Mega. Well, we'll try not to burn the place down in your absence.
Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph. To stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get your first 3 months for just £1 at www.telegraph.co.uk/Ukraine the Latest. Or sign up to Dispatches, our Ukraine newsletter, which brings stories from our award-winning foreign correspondents straight to your inbox. We also have a Ukraine live blog on our website where you can follow updates as they come in throughout the day, including insights from regular contributors to this podcast. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. each weekday on Twitter Spaces. Follow The Telegraph on Twitter so you don't miss it. To our listeners on YouTube, please note that due to issues beyond our control, there is sometimes a delay between broadcast and upload, so if you want to hear Ukraine the Latest as soon as it is released, do refer to podcast apps. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app, and if you have a moment, leave a review, as it helps others find the show. You can also get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. We do read every message. And you can contact us directly on Twitter. You can find our Twitter handles in the description for this episode. Ukraine the Latest is produced by Giles Keir, and the executive producers are Louisa Wells and David Knowles.